the escape to Egypt. Seems like it should have adventure music. And
definitely, this is where they need a good musician in the background. Again, we're getting, like we talked about in chapter 1, we definitely see Joseph's attitude and response through the rest of this chapter. Like, God tells him to do something, he does it. God tells him to do something, he does it. God tells him to do something, he does it. With this one, he doesn't. He senses the urgency of what's being told. He doesn't wait till morning. He doesn't, sit around and like, well, I gotta figure it out, go sell some stuff, get some money together. They pack up, they leave that night, and they head for Egypt. And that's a pretty big deal. I mean, it can be up to a year journey depending on what route they take or where in Egypt they're ending up. But so it's not just a simple task that he's undertaking. It's not super dangerous. There's a lot of caravans and stuff that go through there. So most likely he headed for a location where he could connect with some kind of caravan and they could, travel together towards Egypt. But he does it, and he does it immediately. This is also where you really understand how God works. You have these kings arriving with these very lavish gifts. Oh, kings. Again, I just did that. Magi arriving with these very lavish gifts. And they, you're like, wow, they're set up for life. But here they're going to flee the country. They're going to need finances and stuff to provide for them for the next several years, and especially on their trip and there and back. And so God has provided these expenses right up front with the gold that is easy to spend, the frankincense and the myrrh that could be sold at a later time for a pretty hefty sum. These were high value items, things that would have had a resale value. And so God had provided for them in these elements, even though that wasn't what the Magi had intended. This is what God had intended through that. And thus they were able to escape because, you couldn't pay for caravans and stuff like that without, money and finances. You're going to have to buy food along the way and, various things and expenses, and plus place to stay in Egypt, and it's a lot harder to just go from one place to another during this time frame than during our era. They're not just jumping in the car and driving down. They probably didn't even have a camel. I mean, I know we always depict it with a camel, but they probably just walked. It was them and Jesus. And they probably carried Jesus or made him walk, for as far as a, 1.5-year-old could walk. So it would take a while to do this trip.
Well, they did have some travel money. Old frankincense, myrrh. They had some money to get someplace.
I was going to say, so often we lose context with it, and the fact that, well, he said we had plenty of money as far as that goes, but what I was going to say, you got plenty of concept here, but it'd be like you picking up, or similar to Tim, since he's all the way down in Florida, picking up and walking to Washington State on the other side of the continent as far as that goes. And most people don't have a realistic idea of what that actually takes, because most people, at least nowadays, especially what you would see for Bible quiz and for in general in the United States, they live pretty much their whole life, a lot of people, just within, or don't go much more than 100 miles away. And I think that even pertains to true today, as far as packing up and leaving all your friends, all your family. It just doesn't happen that often. And as short as this is in here, as far as that goes, just a few verses, sometimes we get so trivial of what a big undertaking it was, because they left what they had, friends and everything. Although, albeit that he had a trade as far as Joseph, I imagine he could take anywhere because he was a carpenter. And I'm sure that's something that anybody could find work, because it's like a contractor. You can go anywhere that they're building, which is pretty much everywhere, and you could find a job. So, and I'm sure he could find jobs on the way to wherever he was going. But still, the idea of getting up and leaving and on just a drop of a hat, as far as that goes, it's just a short visit of prayer or of an angel telling him or whatever it was that happened to tell Joseph to move on, as God gave him the direction. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah. The Old Testament passage here is similar to the element of what we dealt with in chapter 1, where when Matthew quotes a passage, often it's a passage that they wouldn't expect to reference to the Messiah. So this passage in Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1, was something that was more of a retelling of the story to the Jewish reader. That's how they would perceive it. He's talking about Israel being called out of Egypt, the 10 plagues, parting of the Red Sea, all of that story. It's more of, to them, this is just Hosea repeating that event. So Matthew's calling it out and saying, no, there was a little more to this. God intended to call his own son out of Egypt, just like he called Jacob out of Egypt. And Jesus is going to trace the steps of Israel from living in Egypt, coming back to the promised land, and even going into the desert to be tempted by the devil. You're going to sort of see this retracing of the steps, and but things that the Israelites wouldn't have necessarily looked at and said, yes, that was a messianic prophecy. So Matthew's quoting them. Often when it's something that was obviously messianic, he's just going to reference it. He's going to give a sort of a, this is what he said. That's obviously referencing some messianic prophecy. He's not going to actually quote the passage. Most of the time when he's quoting it, it's something that's a little bit more obscure or just flat out they would not have noticed at all. In reality, it comes down to the time after Jesus' resurrection. We particularly see this on the road to Emmaus, where they don't even know it's Jesus, but it says, beginning with Moses and prophets, he opened the scriptures to them and showed them that all of this must happen to the Messiah. All this was prophesied ahead of time. And then during that time that he kept seeing the disciples between his resurrection and ascension, those 40 days, I think this is a lot of what he was teaching them is, this is the Old Testament supposed to work. So now here's what you need to do because of that. But I think that's why a lot of them understood this. Also, it talks about how God enabled them to finally see. But these are things that are not easily found in the Old Testament. These are not things you're going to be just looking at. Oh yeah, I understand that. It's easier for us. We're like, yeah, that totally makes sense. That's definitely a prophecy about Jesus coming out of Egypt. But until you read Hosea 11, and then you're like, no, I don't understand how he got that at all.